Shalom, shalom, family, shalom, shalom. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the channel. I hope everyone's enjoying their Shabbat so far. I hope everyone's enjoying their Shabbat this far. And as you all can tell by the title today, we're going to be getting into the ancient Israelites and their Sub-Saharan component or their Sub-Saharan genome, all right? This was the most voted throughout the weekend. Like I said, as promised, we're going to go ahead and start digging into this information as much as possible throughout these next few months over the summer. So I hope everyone can hear me well. And again, shalom, shalom to everyone that's tuning in. Please, if you have questions or anything throughout the video, feel free to comment. And I will try my best to attend to those questions. With at the end, I will be following up by answering all questions if there's any at all. So today we have a lot to get into. We have a lot to get into to cover this topic. So bear with me. Take notes. The sources will be on the screen and everything. So you can write it down for reference if you do need the links to these, because I know they could be hard to find. Just email me or, of course, leave a comment, and I'll feel free to drop the links to everything. So again, shalom to everyone that's tuning in, and shalom to everyone that'll be tuning in later. And I greatly appreciate it, my brother. I greatly appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in, my brother, Lion Farm. Thank you for tuning in, and Shabbat Shalom, brother. So, of course, we will go ahead and get started. All right. Give me a second to get ready, and we can get into it. Again, this will be pretty lengthy. I'm going to try to speed it up, but I have it divided into certain sections. So once the video is done, I will chop it up and post each section we did, because I know a lot of brothers and sisters would like these videos to be a little shorter sometimes. But again, I like to give you all the information at once. But for those, I will try to chop in or shorten some of these clips and post them separately. So Israelite Sub-Saharan African genome is what we will be getting to now. So before we get started, we're going to get into a brief overview of E3A, or the Sub-Saharan African genome, that I believe was a part of the ancient Israelites, or the ancient Israelites had. So source to the right, tracing the ancestors of Impondo clans along the wild coast of Eastern Cape. We're going to start at the top left. It says haplogroup E1B1A. M2 is the most common haplogroup in sub-Saharan Africa, which originated in Northeast Africa between 30,000 to 40,000 years ago. Today, its lineages are found occurring in the Mediterranean and the Near East. So this was an ancient lineage that had its origins. Some believe in Northeast Africa, and some believes actually further in the Near East, possibly Asia. But Northeast Africa would encompass places like the Negev, the Red Sea, Egypt, Ethiopia, Nubia, things like that. It goes on to say that haplogroup E1B1A or EM191 was most likely spread throughout sub-Saharan Africa as a result of migrations associated with the Bantu expansion. All right, it is now the most common haplogroup in sub-Saharan Africa, although its highest levels are seen in West Africa. Continuing. And again, you all know how I do things. We're going to build up. We're going to build up into everything and tie everything together once we get done. So it says, or the source is the genetics of the African populations in health and disease to the left. And we're going to start right here in the middle of the first paragraph, where it says the PN2 or V38 or M2 biolithic lineage is part maps in the distribution of the family, as does haplotype V or IV, which is 4 of the TOC1 49AF RFLP system. And we're actually going to review a source or review some information from this system later on. It's where they use numbers or numeric variables instead of the V2 and the M2 type. So it says in Africa and adjacent regions apparently marks the same clade. The spread of his family or this family is frequently identified with the distribution of these variants in nearly occasional fashion. In other words, the biolithic allele V38M2 is said to be the marker of the Bantu expansion, with some earlier writers who mistakenly called languages in this region Bantu, even though they had not gone into West Africa, or they had gone into West Africa. It says, just as interestingly, it is reported frequencies in one study of Egypt 27% and in Nubia 39%. There are currently no Bantu speakers in these regions and no evidence that they expanded into these regions as settlers, although some ancestral Egyptians may have had contact with the Niger Congo and Nilo-Saharan speakers based on likely loan words. It says, hence the Bantu expansion, a problematic concept, especially as often conceived in any case, cannot be used to explain EM2's presence found in some studies on the Nile Valley populations. And there is no need to invoke the overworn trope of the slave trade, which cannot explain everything. All right. So the main point in bringing this out was to get to this source right here before we move on. Give me 1 second. So we're going to start right here. Of course, where it says the V38 or M35, which would be your E1B1A clans and also your E1B1B clans. So it says the lineage was carried into the Near East from Africa during the Mesolithic. This V38/M35 in Africa corresponds with the TALK 149 AFV. It is far more likely that pre-Proto-Semitic speakers went into the Near East at this time, where Semitic languages have long since dominated, but the predominant haplotypes in most Semitic-speaking populations are variants 7 and 8 in the TALK 149A system, which are equivalent to the FM89 lineages. So it goes on to say the most parsimonious explanation is that ancestral Semitic was adopted by those bearing haplotypes 7 and 8, which goes back to Japhetic lineages or invading European groups into the Levant area. But the original speakers of Afro-Asiatic would have been people with E1B1A and also E1B1B, according to this source, and also others. So that's going to be important when we're establishing the fact that this lineage was in the Israelite population. So we got the brief overview. We saw that Ethiopia was in Near Eastern Africa or has a Near Eastern presence. We saw that it was a part of the original Proto-Afro-Asiatic speakers, and it is also found within modern Semitic-speaking populations of today, as we mentioned, it's in Nubia and also in Egypt, and also other places where Semitic-speaking languages are spoken, and even in Berber and Tuareg populations. So we're going to continue on. Source to the bottom left, origin of the Ashkenazic or Ashkenazi Jews in Yiddish. We're just going to get one quick part from here because we're going to build from this. Starting at the top left, it says the non-Levantine origins of AJs or Ashkenazi Jews is further supported by an ancient DNA analysis of 6 Natufian and Levant Neolithics, some of the most likely Judean progenitors. All right, so these authors believe that the Natufians and later Levant Neolithic populations gave rise to the Jews, the Judeans, or the Israelites. All right, that's very important. So, proposed questions that people have asked is there a connection between the Natufians and Sub-Saharan Africans? And do Sub-Saharan Africans harbor, quote unquote, Natufian ancestry, PPNB Levant ancestry, Bronze Age Levant ancestry, or even Iron Age ancestry? And throughout these next few slides, I will answer that question or these two questions. So the first source we're going to go to is the questionable contribution of the Neolithic and the Bronze Age to European craniofacial form. I'm going to start at the bottom left. The bottom of the paragraph. It says, this is particularly well documented when 18 variables are used to generate a plot of the first two cranial variants as shown in figure 4, which we will review. It says, in this figure, one can see a clear link between Niger-Congo sample and the Natufians, and it's dealing with craniometrics. It says, the prehistoric recent Near Eastern Africa sample also has a subsequent link to the Niger-Congo sample. And again, that would make a lot of sense because, again, we did read that it is believed that EM2 has its origins in Northeast Africa or the Near East. And right here is figure 4 dealing with the connection between the Niger-Congo group the Natufian, and even the prehistoric recent Northeast African groups. And we see all these three cranials clustered together, all right, showing a connection between the Natufians. But it goes on to say, if the late Paleocene Natufian sample from Israel is the source from which the Neolithic spread was derived, then there was clearly a sub-Saharan African element present of almost equal importance as the late prehistoric Eurasian element. So they're actually saying there was a sub-Saharan African element in the makeup of the Natufians, and they're basing this basically off the craniometrics of these people. All right, and by sub-Saharan African, they mean specifically the Niger-Congo groups. It says the interbreeding of the incoming Neolithic people with the in situ foragers diluted the sub-Saharan African traces that may have come with Neolithic spread, so that no discoverable element of that remains. So it's also possible that these sub-Saharan African traces amongst the Natufians got diluted over time. And here again, it's showing a connection between the Niger-Congo groups and the Natufians. So the question is, there a connection between Natufian and sub-Saharan Africans? Indeed, there is, especially when we're dealing with craniometrics. But is there a DNA connection as well? Genomic insights into the origins of farming into the ancient Near East. This tells us that craniometric analysis have suggested an affinity between the Natufians and populations of North or Sub-Saharan Africa, which we just reviewed. A result that finds some support from the Y chromosome analysis, which shows the Natufians and successor Levant Neolithic populations carried haplogroup E of ultimate African origin. So remember that part. Natufians and successor Levant Neolithic populations carried haplogroup E. It didn't specify which specific clade, but we are going to get a little insight on that. And it said this has not been detected in other ancient males from Western Eurasia. That's because a lot of those other ancient males from Western Eurasia would be different branches and lineages of Japhet, if it's not E or D. But continuing, reconstructing prehistoric African population structure. It gets real interesting because it verifies something for us. Starting right here with this sample, the Tanzania Pemba 600 BC or BP sample. It says Maui, Chawi, or Chiwa, Maui, and Nguni. These are listed off Bantu tribes, basically. It goes on to say Maui, Tumbuka, Maui Yo, Yaruba, Isan, Gambia, Lua, Bantu Kenya, Bantu Sa Avumbu, Himba, Wamba, and Bantu South Africa Hero. They are all fitted as consistent with having 100% Mende-related Western African-related ancestry. This is when it gets important, because it tells us that the Mandinka from Western Africa or from the West African coast are fitted as having 2.8% to 0.6% Levant Neolithic related ancestry, specifically PPNB, which is actually the Natufian period. All right. So again, the Mandinka from West Africa are fitted as having 2.8% to 0.6% Levant Neolithic related ancestry, specifically from the PPNB, which is related to the Natufian period. Now, we would expect it to be this low by today's standards or by today's time, because over time, doing different migrations, doing different intermixtures, it will become diluted by the time they ended up in Western Africa from the Levant. And we know that the Mande Mandinka peoples actually have an oral tradition of coming from Jerusalem into Aswan under their ancestor Dinga before migrating into Western Africa. And again, all these Bantu tribes also have ancestry that goes back to this West African group that has this Levant Neolithic related ancestry, PPNB. Again, admixture graph solutions where Mende from Sierra Leone and Yoruba from Nigeria have ancestry from basal West African lineage. The other source of Western African ancestry is most closely related to Eastern Africans and non-Africans, which could be consistent with an expansion from Eastern Africa. Right, we know a lot of the East Africans, or majority of the Eastern Africans, with haplogroup E would be non-Africans as well, or Semitic Africans that migrated into, and we know those non-Africans would be other people with E as well. Also, another link right here, Paleocene North African genomes link Near Easterners and Sub-Saharan African human populations. It tells us that a more recent link is the spread of Bronze Age-like or Bronze Age Levant-like ancestry in Sub-Saharan Africa together with agriculture during the Bantu expansion. Again, a more recent link is the spread of Bronze Age Levant-like ancestry in Sub-Saharan Africa together with agriculture during the Bantu expansion. So we see PPNB Levant ancestry in Sub-Saharan Africans, and we also see Bronze Age Levant ancestry in Sub-Saharan Africans. So when we go back to this source right here, the origins of the Ashkenazi Jews, and it tells us that the Six Natufians and the Levant Neolithic samples are the more than likely the progenitors of the Judeans. We can see that Sub-Saharan Africans actually harbor that ancestry as well. So let's continue to expound or build upon that. So again, yes, Sub-Saharan Africans do have Levant Neolithic PPNB ancestry, or they do have PPNB ancestry, and they also have Bronze Age ancestry, which we just reviewed, which is huge. So let's take a look at modern Jewish populations to start to build on this and show that EM2 or E1B1A is indeed an Israelite lineage, and it would have, or the Israelites would have had it. Like, it's just hand down a fact. Localizing Ashkenazi Jews in primeval villages in the ancient Iranian lands of Ashkenaz. Prior to applying GPS to elucidate the geographic origins of AJs, we sought to evaluate its accuracy on Afro-Asian populations. It says in Western Eurasians, in Western Eurasians, Mediterraneans, Southwest Asians, and North Europeans are the most dominant admixture components, with the latter nearly replacing the Sub-Saharan African component. We're going to skip over here, right here, what it says. Like most Eurasians, Yiddish speakers' genomes are a medley of three major components: Mediterranean, Southwest Asian, and Northern European. Although, like ancient pre-Scythians, they also exhibit a small and consistent Sub-Saharan African component, up to 2% in general agreement with the prior Majorni paper, which we'll review later. So we see that even Ashkenazi Jews harbor Sub-Saharan African ancestry. And the question is, where did that come from? Is it possible that, actual Jews did go into these locations? So this is a graph from this study that we was just looking at, and it shows the migration route, or the supposed migration route of Jews going into these locations. And we see that right here on the right, the E1B haplotypes, which would be the E1B2, or E1B P2 haplotypes, which would consist of E1B1A and E1B1B within their cluster. So that's very interesting. It gets interesting again once we go to this chart right here and we look at the admixture proportions. To get a reference, we can look right here at the Egyptians, and we can see the significant amount of Sub-Saharan African ancestry they have marked with the red. Also in Bedouins, with the Sub-Saharan African ancestry that they harbor, Palestinians as well. And if we go over here to the Ashkenazi Jews, we see the Sub-Saharan African amongst their admixture as well, but is at a minor percentage. And even at this chart, we see it again in the Ashkenazi Jews, but over here where it goes to the Israelites, it gets a lot of more, or it gets, I guess you can say, more of a Sub-Saharan African component. And then once we're looking at this is just what they believe the ancient Israelites would have had. They believe they would have had I guess you would say, a Mediterranean component, also a Sub-Saharan African component, and also a Northern European component. Opposed to my beliefs, I believe it would just be a mix of Sub-Saharan African, E1B1A, and North African, E1B1B. And again, this is just showing that Ashkenazi Jews do harbor, Sub-Saharan African E1B1A. And that's possibly because some of them do actually descend from the original Judean population that do, or that would have that E1B1A. So of course we're going into this. We've read this multiple times. We're just reading this because again it goes with what we're reading, and it's also going to lead us into the next segue of the video. So the history of African gene flow in Southern Europeans, Levantines, and Jews. A striking finding from our study is it's the consistent detection of 3 to 5 Sub-Saharan African ancestry in the 8 diverse Jewish groups we studied: Ashkenazis, Sephardis, and Mizrahis. The pattern has not been detected in previous analysis of mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomal data, and although it can be seen when re-examining published results of structure-like analysis of autosomal data, which we just looked at actually, it was not highlighted in those studies or shown to unambiguously reflect sub-Saharan African admixture. We estimate the average date of the mixture of 72 generations, around 2,000 years, assuming 29 per generations. The point the point estimates over all 8 populations are between 1,600 and 3,400 years ago. All right, that's meaning this DNA would have been in those people around that time. Especially if we go back to 3,400 years ago, that's before the Israelites, or at least right on the scene of the Exodus. But it says, but with the largely overlapping confidence intervals, it is intriguing that the Mizrahi, Iranian, and Iraqi Jews, who are thought to descend at least in part from Jews who were exiled to Babylon about 2,600 years ago, share the signal of African admixture. A parsimonious explanation for these observations is that they reflect a history in which many of the Jewish groups descended from a common ancestral population, which itself was admixed with Africans prior to the beginning of this Jewish diaspora that occurred in the 8th and 6th century BCE. All right, and I actually believe, or I'm actually going to show that DNA that those Jews ancestry goes back to would be E1B1A. It says the dates that emerged from the roll-off analysis in the non-Mizrahi Jews could also reflect events in the Greek and Roman periods when there were large Jewish communities in North Africa, particularly Alexandria. We detect a similar mixture proportion of the non-Jewish Jews, although this date is more recent. So again, looking at this chart right quick, because again, we're about to switch into a source population of of Sephardic Jews rather. Again, we see EM2 in Spain and Portugal, and also in the Sephardic Jewish population. Also the Iraqi Jewish population, Iranian, Syrian, Ashkenazi, all right, and even in the Palestinian and Bedouin populations, all right. These are Semitic, Afro-Asiatic speaking populations when it comes to the Bedouin and also the Palestinians. So continue. The finding of African ancestry in Southern Europe dating to 55 generations ago to 1,600 years ago, assuming 29 years per generation, needs to be placed in historical context. Why is that? Because a lot of Sephardic Jews were actually going into Southern Europe during this time, all right? Which is the same time we see this admixture between the two populations happening. It says the historical records documents multiple interactions of African and European populations over this period. And the Sephardic Jews will be a part of that African population, which I will show with source material in a few slides. It says, one potential opportunity for African gene flow was during this period, or the period of the Roman occupation of North Africa, that lasted until the early 5th century AD. And indeed, tomb inscriptions and literary references suggest that trade relations continued even after that time. Another potential source of some of the African ancestry, especially in Spain and Portugal, is the invasion of Iberia by the Moorish armies after 71 AD. And that's important because we actually can distinguish the Moors from the Jews, because a lot of the Moors were actually just your Berber peoples. A lot of them had the same paternal haplogroup that the Berbers of North Africa have, and even Morocco and things like that. So in layman's terms, a lot of the Berbers had EM81. So when we start finding these, a lot of the Moors had EM81. So once we start to go into these Moorish burial sites, so we start to see E1B1A in those, we have to question, are those Moors or are those Jews? So it says, if the Moors already had some African ancestry when they arrived in Southern Europe, and then admixture with Iberians, we would expect the admixture date to be older than the date of the invasion as we observe. So we're going to go to the Sephardic Jews as a source population. We will go to the Sephardic Jews as a source population. If you privy to my channel, we have went over a lot of history regarding the Sephardic Jews, them being described as black, having an African character, black as Negroes, being expelled to Africa, being expelled to Western Africa, being sold as slaves to America. We've brought out that history. So can we see a connection between us and them? Can we see the Sub-Saharan African DNA within the Sephardic Jews of Spain and Portugal? First source we're going to use is the Journal of Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland. We're just going to use a few sources to dig into the DNA. And it says, many travelers and anthropologists have noticed the likeness of Armenians to Jews. Their moral characters are also very similar. I do not speak of their common traditions because of these may be due to more modern intercourse. Once in Palestine, these Jews absorbed part of the native population. And again, if you've been privy to my show or to my channel, we know what the native populations or the native Canaanite population would have been. They would have been J and E markers. It says, from Egypt, they carried with them perhaps some Negrotic tribes and thus formed the type shown by the Jews in Lachish. And that's dealing with when Sennacherib came down and sacked Lachish. And we see those murals of those woolly-headed, Negroid-looking Judeans. It says the Jews, however, always preserve two types, the one acquired by the Naric influence, and that can be, I guess you can say those are the Japhetic peoples that invaded the Near East or the Levant, would constitute those Naric races. And it says, and the others due to intermixture with the ground race and other tribes of Palestine and Negroes of Egypt. The first type may be considered as forming the aristocracy. It is from this that would descend the Portuguese Jews. So the Portuguese Jews would descend from these Negrotic Jews of Lachish, while the German Jews would come from the other Japhetic or Naric influences that, invaded or came into the Jewish fold. So again, the Portuguese Jews would be of that Negrotic stock of the Jews of Lachish. Next source, scattered nation, past, present, and future. Spain was in the ancient times a land of immense metallic resources, and that this was known to the Jews appears in First Maccabees, written 300 years BC. But to come to rabbinical authors, Barbanel in his contemporary or commentary on Zechariah, the Lord shall save the tents of Judah, affirms that at the desolation of the first temple, two families of the house of David came and settled in Spain, one at Lucena, the other the Barbanels at Seville, and from these came 1,000 offshoots. It says this, he quoted from an earlier author, Isaac ben Gahaf, but in the works of the latter that now remain, there is no such statement to be found. In the 17th century, Manasseh ben Israel, who had married a daughter of the Barbanels, traced their origin in Spain to the Second Temple. All right, and then again, dealing with the history of the African gene flow and Jews, Southern Europeans, and Palestinians, it also tells us that during this time of the Second Temple, you had Judeans going into Northern Africa, which is where they see some of this admixture taking place that ended up happening in Southern Europe. It says the Scepter of Judah, a work compiled since the expulsion from Spain, gives in conversation in the 13th century between a philosopher named Thomas and King Alfonso, which we may learn, if we can believe it, that a king of Spain who had assisted Nebuchadnezzar in reducing Jerusalem brought an enormous population into Spain, and from either the family of David or from at least the tribe of Judah, and that the royal family resided first in Seville, then Granada, adding that these exiles afterward had their numbers greatly increased by the fugitives from the desolation of the Second Temple, and we know they would have been coming in from North Africa. And also keep in mind, these Portuguese Jews would have been coming from those Negrotic tribes of Lachish. So let's get into this source right here, History of the Interpretation of Pattern of P49AF TAC1 RFL PY chromosome variation in Egypt, a consideration of multiple lines of evidence. We're about to start looking at the DNA in the Sephardic population and see if we see the Sub-Saharan African component or genome. All right. And again, I told you we will be dealing with this specific system, the P49A system, where it gives you the Roman numerals as opposed to E1B1A or E1B1B. So again, haplogroup IV or 4 is specifically E1B1A, and we see it in Sephardic Jews at 8% doing this specific test in Egypt. And haplogroup V or 5 would be E1B1B. And we see that they also consist of 18% within that group as well. Moving on, Y chromosome specific haplotype, diversity in Ashkenazic and Sephardic Jews. Let's see where we should start. We're going to start at the highlighted part. It says haplotype distributions in the two Jewish populations are similar, but haplotypes XI and XV are more frequent in Ashkenazim. All right, XI would be 6. XI would actually be, I believe, 11, and XV would be 15. And haplotypes 4 and 5 are more frequent in the Sephardim, indicating their origins. And again, haplotypes 4 and 5, E1B1A, E1B1B. So it says Sephardic Jews and similar results are also obtained in other Jewish populations. Haplotype XI, the third most common haplotype in Jews, is found here more frequently in the Ashkenazim than in the Sephardim. Similar results also were obtained by Sennacherib et al. 1992. For the European haplotypes, the present study shows that they are slightly or significantly or slightly haplogroups XII and XIV or significantly haplotype XV, more elevated in the Ashkenazim than the Sephardim. So the Ashkenazim Jewry or Jewish population actually has more elevated European haplotypes, which would consist of those FM89 lineages like they have outlined it here. While the Sephardim has proportions of African haplotypes. So again, the African haplotypes will be haplotype 4 or IV, E1B1A, and also V, E1B1B. And these are more elevated in the Sephardim than in the Ashkenazim. We're going to start at the first highlighted where it says, again, haplotypes 4 and 5 are more frequent in the Sephardim, which will be E1B1A and E1B1B. Skipping to the next highlighted or to the next yellow, it says, on the other hand, the presence of haplotypes 4 and 5 in the Sephardim, as in African populations, reflect their African and Asian origins. All right. And that's very important because we know that haplogroups 4 and 5 or haplogroups E1B1A, E1B1A and E1B1B actually were the pre-Proto-Semitic speakers. So with these haplogroups being in the Sephardic Jewish population, it's actually reflecting their African and Asian origins or their Afro-Asiatic origins, as this paper beautifully outlines. So again, haplotypes IV is haplogroup E1B1A, and haplogroup V specifically is E1B1B. So let's look at the numbers. This is just a graph right here showing the distributions of the different 16 haplotypes within these populations. And again, these populations are more mixed, or the Jewish populations, I guess you could say that's in Europe are more mixed than the populations that you would see in Africa, the Jewish population that you would see in Africa or Yemen. And again, haplogroup 4, we see that it consists of 13% of the Sephardim in this specific study, which will be E1B1A constituting 13% and E1B1B constituting 14%. All right. And these samples were taken from Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Greece, and Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. All right. And again, the Sephardim DNA reflects their Afro-Asiatic origins by way of E1B1A and also E1B1B. But again, those E1B1B lineages could be Moorish lineages from the Berbers. So, moving on, the genomic history of the Iberian Peninsula over the past 8,000 years. Continue to search for that Sub-Saharan African DNA in these Sephardic Jews. We're going to start at the highlighted section where it says, let's see, should we start there? Let's start from the very top. It says in the Southeast, we recovered genomic data from 45 individuals dated between the 3rd and 16th century CE. All the analyzed individuals fell outside of genetic variation of preceding Iberian Iron Age populations and harbored ancestry from both Southern European and North African populations, as well as additional Levantine-related ancestry that could reflect Jewish contributions. All right, again, we remember we found E1B1A and PPNB. We have E1B1A in the Bronze Age Levant, and we also have E1B1A 300 or 3,400 years ago within the Jewish population. So if we find E1B1A within this study, we can assume or come to the conclusion that this is by way of Jews. It says these results demonstrate that by the Roman period, Southern Iberia had experienced a major influx of North African ancestry, probably related to well-known mobility patterns during the Roman Empire. Gene flow from North Africa continued into the Muslim period, as is clear from Muslim burials with elevated North African and Sub-Saharan African ancestry, and uniparental markers typical of North African, not present among pre-Islamicized or pre-Islamic individuals. Present-day populations from Southern Iberia harbor less African or North African ancestry than the ancient Muslim burials, possibly or plausibly reflecting the expulsion of the Maurisos, and repopulation from the north, as supported by historical sources and genetic analysis of present-day groups. So what they found within the Iberian Peninsula is that there is a elevated North and Sub-Saharan African ancestry, specifically Sub-Saharan African ancestry, within these Muslim burial mounds. So let's look at that. Specifically in that study, this is dealing with a chart. Again, we can look at the Sephardic Jewish population. Of course, we will find E1B1A there. That really shouldn't be surprising at this point. And that's really why I was bringing this out, to show that it's not uncommon for, us to see E1B1A in these Jewish populations of today. But once we get into like Sub-Saharan Africa and we look at your Igbo Jews and Yoruba Jews and the other Jews in Sub-Saharan Africa, we would see E1B1A at over 80%. All right, which we'll get into later on. But we look right here to the far right, we can see E1B1A or E3A, and we can see it in the Sephardic Jewish population. And we can also see it scattered around in various other Iberian populations, which will reflect Jewish and Muslim influence. All right. I also see it in Morocco and Algeria, and also on the islands over here. Small percentages, but so we're going to go to the supplementary materials of this study, the genomic history of the Iberian Peninsula over the past 8,000 years, and we're going to read the source from the top left. It says, as previously mentioned, two individuals dated to the 10th century and to the 16th century plot a very different position in the PCA, reflecting a very different ancestral profile. We were able to model them as a mixture of ancestry related to previous populations from the same region and ancestry related to present-day Sub-Saharan African populations. And listen to the language of this paper, because it didn't say and related to ancient Sub-Saharan African populations. It said related to present-day Sub-Saharan African populations. That's very important, because the population in Sub-Saharan Africa actually immigrated there. They aren't native. It says the high proportions of Sub-Saharan African ancestry explain their marked shift in PCA and agree with uniparental markers with Sub-Saharan African origin in both individuals. All right, and here is the Excel sheet showing the haplogroups within these specific burial findings, and we have one E1B1A marker. Of course, in the Sephardic population, and then if we go over here to this arch gig, we can find more specific burial sites dealing with that specific study we just reviewed. One in Granada, EM2 dating back to around 900 CE. And also over here near Barcelona, another E1B1A sample, specifically EZ5994, dating back to the 8th to 12th century in the Iberian period, a known Jewish period, Sephardic Jewish period specifically. So continuing on, supplementary data from the genetic legacy of the religious diversities and intolerance, parental lineages of Christians, Jews, and Muslims in Iberian Peninsula. So we're going to look at some burial remains and findings of the Jews, or yes, basically DNA from these areas where these Jews, Christians, and Muslims would have been. And again, we see E3A, Sephardic Jewish population. Of course, different E3B lineages. Go to Majorca, E3A again, to be expected. Southern Portugal, E3A again, to be expected. All right, and I'm proposing this is by way of Sephardic Jewish influence in Southern Portugal or in Europe, Southern Europe, Sephardic Jewish influence. All right, and also in the Valencia markets. We know about the Sephardic Jews being sold from the Valencia slave markets, right? We've reviewed a lot of historical records on these people. And of course, E3A. So let's continue. And finally, before we move on, finally, we're going to go to DNA evidence suggests many lowland Scots and Northern Irish have Jewish ancestry. It says right here at the highlighted, finally, the EM2 branch, which is largely centered in Central Africa, with some North African distribution, was found in Scottish persons named MacDonald, Magruder, Austin, Logan, and Ryan. Notably, cross-listed persons having the same haplotype included a man named Al-Mazir from Saudi Arabia and a man named El Azab from Egypt. And I guarantee you, neither one of those brothers speak Niger-Congo. Neither one of those brothers speak Bantu languages. It goes on to say, it is probable that this haplotype may have entered the Jewish population very early on. Now, the only thing I disagree with is that it entered the Jewish population. I believe it was a founding lineage of the Jews. I believe the Jews would have inherited this haplotype from their ancestors, Jacob. So again, it says it is possible that this haplotype may have entered the Jewish population very early on, while it was still centered in the southern Arabian Peninsula. All right, so they had to say this because they see that a lot of these Sephardic Jews are popping up with E1B1A or EM2 branches. And it goes on to say, recall that the biblical text mentioned trading networks extending to Egypt as well as the Israelites dwelling in Egypt for an extended period of time. And it's very important because we know that it is said that EM2 or E1B1A originated in, Northeast Africa. So just throwing that out there. And one last source before we wrap up the source population dealing with the Sephardi, we're going to go to DNA fingerprints plus 18 marker ethnic panel, the source we'll be using. Give me 1 second while I look at this chat real quick. If anybody has any questions, please drop them and I'll get to them once we wrap it up. We almost done, family. Thank you for everyone that's tuning in right now. Much love. The sister, I don't know if this is a sister or a brother. I'm going to say a sister. Miriam Jones said, well, I could tell you that I have Ashkenazi and Berber of antiquity in my DNA. That's very, very interesting. That's very, very interesting. But To continue, this is very interesting as well, this source, because it says Sub-Saharan African matches can perhaps be attributed to Iberian, Spanish/Portuguese ancestry. All right, and again, I believe that would be by way of the Sephardic Jews. Again, Sub-Saharan African matches can perhaps be attributed to Iberian, Spanish/Portuguese ancestry, which is marked by relative elevated Sub-Saharan African admixture, as well as being due to deep ancestry, as scientists believe we all came originally from Africa. It says, however, Sub-Saharan African is common with anyone who has matches to older populations like Jewish and Middle Eastern. So it's actually common for Middle Easterners and Jewish people, quote unquote, to have Sub-Saharan African DNA or ancestry, or specifically E1B1A. So again, Sub-Saharan African is common to anyone who has matches to older populations like Jewish and Middle Eastern. Again, we can find a lot of Jews, we can find a lot of Palestinians, a lot of Bedouins, a lot of Arabians, a lot of Yemenis, a lot of Omanis, a lot of people. Get what I'm saying? That will reflect this DNA being in that location or in that region. So we finished that up. So we're going to wrap it up by looking at the history of the Israelites migrating into Sub-Saharan Africa and how that reflects the DNA. All right. So it's by now we should pretty much have an understanding that when the Israelites were walking out of Egypt to go and conquer Canaan, E1B1A would have been flowing through their veins. And I really stand firm on that. So before we get into it, we're going to explain or basically show when this expansion of these Israelites would have came in or happened in Africa. And I believe it would have been during the Bantu expansion. So E3A, African lineage that, most likely dispersed south from Northern Africa within the last 3,000 years with the Bantu agriculture expansion. It says this is the most common lineages among African Americans. All right. So again, this Bantu expansion or this E3A lineage would have dispersed from Northern Africa around 3,000 years ago with the Bantu expansion. Now we're going to look at carriers of mitochondria, DNA, macrohaplogroup L3, basal lineages migrated back to Africa from Asia around 70,000 years ago. Now we just established that the Bantu expansion bringing E3A or E1B1A in Africa into Sub-Saharan Africa happened around 3,000 years ago. That is important because when they came into Africa, they actually replaced the native inhabitants. And it pretty much outlines that here, where it says it appears that the E and L2/L3, can't forget about our women, expansions were strongest in the Western Sahel, which would be over here in the parts over like Mali, Niger, Takor, and even the Sudan. And Western Guinea, which would be like modern day Nigeria, Ghana, Cape d'Ivoire, Cape Ivory, and Guinea, where they replaced the majority of the oldest mtDNAs, L0, L1, and also the Y chromosomes lineages A and B. So that's important because if we are going to say Jews came into Sub-Saharan Africa, what Y chromosomes would distinguish incoming peoples from the native peoples that was already there. And that chromosome that would distinguish incoming ways of people would be the E lineage and how it actually came over and replaced a lot of those old autochthonous A and B lineages, which will actually be sons of Ham. So let's deal with one of my favorite sources, talking about the ancient Israelites and how they made their way into Sub-Saharan Africa. So ancient Near Eastern influence in Sub-Saharan Africa. This is my Magadel Leroux. And we're going to read the abstract real quick, where it says, recent research shows that the cultural remnants of a more distant past were more faithfully preserved in Sub-Saharan Africa than in the societies further north. Let me read that again because that might have went over some people's head. Recent research shows that the cultural remnants of a more distant past were more faithfully preserved in sub-Saharan Africa than in the societies further north, striking parallels between extant African cultures and written as well as oral testimonies concerning ancient Near Eastern society can be detected. It becomes clear that in the period preceding the textual evidences of the Middle Ages, African societies were not isolated or self-contained, but that instead they took part of various levels of global exchange. Historians are inclined to attach considerable importance to written sources while they tend to disregard the stories that are orally transmitted. And why is that important? Because with historians disregarding the stories of our ancestors that are orally transmitted, they won't understand how we got into Western Africa. Because all of our ancestors or traditions tell of a migration from the East. And they have traditions and cultures that match Near Eastern traditions and cultures. A lot of the tribes in West Africa have Israelite traditions, Phoenician traditions, Canaanite traditions, other type of Semitic traditions and influences with the haplogroup to show that they actually did come from the distant East. It says, an adopt and comparative perspective, which leads to the conclusion that the oral traditions which trace the origins of some African states or cultures to the Near East or to the ancient Near East are basically correct. And again, they would be correct, especially once we pair it with the genetics. Various pieces of information indicating very early immigrants to Africa from the Semitic world do exist. During the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fences of Judah and took them. According to Jewish authors, some Hebrews or Israelites tried to escape their wrath by fleeing into Africa. Speaking of the Jews, Lishbar, pressed under sweeping regional conflicts, said that Jews settled as traders and warriors in Yemen. Before I continue going, we have the tradition of the Limba coming from Yemen. And we see that they have the DNA. They have not only E1B1A, they have E1B1B, and they also have other Eurasian haplotypes that show that they did indeed come from, the Near East. The Horn of Africa, we have the Eldad the Danite story of Jews coming down from coming down from Egypt to the Horn of Africa, going down into Kush, migrating west. All right. But let me stop butchering around. Let me get through this. It says the Horn of Africa, Egypt and the Kingdom of Kush and Nubia, North African Punic settlements, and areas now covered by Mauritania. More immigrants followed these early Jewish settlers to Africa following the Assyrian conquest of the Israelites in the 8th century BCE. Stop. The history of the African gene flow in Southern Europeans, Levantes, and Jews tells us that these Jews or these Israelites would have had E1B1A before the 8th century BCE. We know that the Bantu expansion was around 2,500 years ago to 3,000 years ago, which actually matches up to the 8th century BCE. So it's probable to say that the Bantu expansion from North Africa or from Egypt was indeed Jewish migrants, Israelite migrants fleeing from the Assyrian captivity into Sub-Saharan Africa. Rabbi Dalton Nasi has placed the Hebrew Israelites all over the African continent. The Assyrians were not the only kings to have come up against Israel. 200 years later, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, conquered Jerusalem and destroyed destroyed the first temple. Again, the Israelites tried to escape persecution and ran into the continent of Africa. Even after they were first instructed by Jeremiah not to. So we keep seeing a constant influx, and we can go through historical documentations all day of Israelites migrating into Africa. But can we see a genetic reflection of that? Yes, we can, and it's by way of E1B1A. We don't see haplogroup J migrating into Western Africa. We don't see haplogroup T migrating into Western Africa. The only haplogroup or the only Eurasian The other only Eurasian haplogroup we see in Western Africa is haplogroup R, and we know that origins, or their origins. So again, by default, or the common denominator would be E. Again, the Israelites tried to escape persecution and ran into the continent of Africa even after they were instructed by Jeremiah not to. The rebels even appealed to the Queen of Heaven, Ishtar, by burning incense and to call upon her favors in the struggle against Babylon. And we see that this tradition was brought into the Elephantine Jewish community by way of Anat Yahu, the Queen of Heaven, and it was also brought into Western Africa by way of the Hakan, by way of Asaseyah, the Queen of Heaven. So that's how you actually connect things right there, family. It says the compatriots of Jeremiah were carried away to Egypt. He joined them under protest. The prophet warned them that he was going to push the king of Nebuchadnezzar into Egypt and capture both Egypt and them. The warning could have caused many Israelites to migrate deeper into Africa. According to Grizel, some Jewish mercenaries were employed by the Babylonians to guard the southern Egypt border around 600 BCE. They needed soldiers to protect the southern frontier of Egypt against the attacks of the Ethiopians. He added that they gave them a land in the district called Aswan, or Elephantine, right, the same community, and granted them permission to build a temple and offer sacrifices to their god. And this is also where they brought Ishtar, or Anat Yahu, to. It says around 176 BC, King Antiochus ruled the Greek kingdom and came up against Israel. Approximately 2 years later, the king attacked Jerusalem and destroyed the city and burned it down. He also ordered them to give up their practices, or he would be put to death. Again, many Hebrews fled into the Arabian Peninsula and into Africa. After the Greeks, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem around 70 CE. The restriction facing the Hebrews forced them to immigrate even in greater numbers than before. So we keep seeing a continuation of Israelite migrations into Africa. Rome's vengeance forced the Hebrews who lived in Caesarea, approximately 100,000 and 1,000,000 in Egypt, to flee into West and South Africa. It says Lichbald agrees that the Jewish presence in Africa began to expand significantly in the 2nd and 3rd century of the Christian era, extending not only to the Sahara Desert, but also reaching down along the West African coast, and possibly also to some Bantu tribes of southern Africa, who, according to him, some 4,000 members of the Lemba clan still claim Jewish roots. He goes on to say that such is the explanation of how the Sahara Desert and further south, further south of the Sahara is going down towards the Congo. All right. He says such is the explanation of how the Sahara and further south first acquired Jewish tribes. Why we find so many remnants of ancient Near East in Africa, south of the Sahara. All right. And we're going to wrap it up by using this great source. All right. Because this right here verifies everything that we've been bringing out. A lot of other channels have been bringing out concerning DNA, concerning West Africans being Israelites, and concerning that they do have the haplotype that shows that they came from the Levant Basin. And this is by way of Obadiah allowance. If you have a problem with their findings, you can email them. The email's right here below, because I know a lot of people is hating off this. But it says there exists a claim that the Igbos of Nigeria belong to the children of Israel. There are millions of inhabitants in and out of Igbo land who belong to the Igbo tradition. Much has been written about the Igbo traditions, which attest to the claim, including historical and anthropological works detailing lore, custom, sociology, physiology, and history. Despite strong evidences of their connection to the biblical Israelites due to forced conversions to Christianity, there are a few rabbinical authorities today who decided that Igbos must undergo either a full conversion or undergo strict procedures to remove all doubt and to reintegrate them into the Jewish people. What is halakha regarding the Israelite identity, and can halakha Jews marry with them? Due to the transgression of our ancestors, our nation was divided into two kingdoms before the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And during the time of the prophet Jeremiah, while the vast majority of the Israelites went into Babylon, some Israelites relocated and founded a community in the Elephantine Jewish community. All right, we keep seeing that these Israelites made their way into Egypt. They stopped in Aswan and created the Elephantine Jewish community, and they made their way further south and west. Genetic studies of the Y chromosome. What is the Y chromosome? The Sub-Saharan African E1B1A that we did this whole video about. Genetic studies on the Y chromosome of the Igbo men demonstrate that they originated in the Levant Basin, sharing genetic links with Sephardic and Ashkenazic Jews alike. Didn't we already show the connection between the Sephardic Jews and how they have E1B1A and how the Ashkenazi Jews have E1B1A? We've already showed this. And that means that those Sephardic Jews, those Ashkenazi Jews that have E1B1A, they are possibly related to the authentic original stock of the Jews. Again, genetic studies of the Y chromosome of the Igbo men demonstrate that they originated in the Levant Basin. While there is yet an exhausting academic genetic study of the Igbos, the data of the majority of those who have reported their autosomal and Y chromosome DNA supports that their ancestors migrated from the Levant Basin into East Africa and then settled in West Africa. Again, their Y chromosome, E1B1A, supports that they migrated from the Levant Basin to East Africa and to West Africa. All right. And that goes with everything we've been bringing out so far, especially when it's dealing with when we dealt with the Jewish migrations into Sub-Saharan Africa, because we have to understand that the Igbos are not the only people with this Y chromosome, and they are not the only people with Israelite traditions in Sub-Saharan Africa. They're not even the only people with the Y chromosome and traditions in Nigeria. You also have your Efik. You also have your Ibibio. You also have your Yoruba. You also have your Igala, and that's just in Nigeria. All right. So with that, we wrap it up. And I want you all to keep in mind or remember these specific pointers that we pointed out today, specifically dealing with how the Natufians and successful Levant Neolithic people would have been the progenitors of the Jews. All right, we saw that the Natufians and those Levant Neolithic populations, they would have had haplogroup E. We connected that with the Bantu populations and with the Sub-Saharan African populations, showing that they did have, or that they do actually have, PPNB Levant Neolithic ancestry, and that they also have Bronze Age ancestry. I want you to remember this as well, the history of African gene flow in Southern Europeans, Levantines, and Jews. This gives us the information, letting us know that all these Jewish groups that we see today, the known Jewish groups, that they have a small portion of our DNA, and the only explanation is that this DNA was amongst the original Israelites. All right. I also want you to remember that the Bantu expansion would have happened around the same time of the Israelites fleeing into Africa from the Assyrian exile. And once those Israelites migrated into the Sahara Desert, they would have been replacing those old autochthonous A and B lineages, all right, making a change agriculturally and also culturally. And also, I want you all to remember that Obadiah Alliance, the Sephardic Jewish organization, actually did a genetic study on the Igbos, and they concluded that they did originate from the Levant Basin, that they share genetic ties with other Jewish groups. All right, they just harbor E1B1A at a more at a larger, I guess you could say, proportion. Again, they have it at about 93% that they have E1B1A. But you do have other Jewish groups like the Bamaliki that have it at 100%. You have the Yoruba who have it at like 97. You have the Ewe who have it at like 97. The God 97. So again, there's a lot of more Jewish groups in Nigeria, or excuse me, specifically Sub-Saharan Africa, that we can look at that connects to this specific source, confirm the Igbos and their genetics. So with that, that is all I have for the Israelite Sub-Saharan African genome. And I'm going to wrap it up by looking at questions within the chat. I hope you all enjoyed this, man. I hope you all enjoyed this. Let me go back from that. I really hope you all enjoyed the video. Try to catch up with the chat. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free to drop them. I will drop the link in the chat for anyone who wants to come up for a few moments. I have a little time. Probably we will be doing a book reading tomorrow on the Phoenician Israelite connection, since you all did vote for that as well. So there's the link, but let me try to catch up with some questions if there are any. And again, if you have any questions, please go ahead and drop them. Brother said, talk that true family. The Tufi and Ladder became groups in Africa, linking Bantu by E1B1 star. And that's facts. And I actually believe that's probably why they do have that Levant Neolithic PPNB, because of that the EP2. All right. And again, there probably was Natufians with E1B1A. We just haven't found those samples yet. You know what I'm saying? So we don't specifically know if they did yet. Let's see. Brother dropping verses out. Jeremiah 51. Let's see. Brother Dorvell was saying something. I don't know what you mean by that, brother. Rephrase your question if you had a question or something. Blood that draws the bow is Tasseti. I know that's dealing with Egypt. Tasseti, I believe. Shabbat shalom. Indeed. Mystery Babylon is indeed becoming more and more clear. Oh yes, nothing would be hid for too long. The Most High will always put it on our minds, whether it's mine, whether it's yours, whether it's someone, you know what I'm saying, to bring this information to the forefront. Blessings to you as well. Shabbat shalom. The brother says facts. Haplogroup E replaced A1A, A1B, and BM60 haplogroups in Africa. That's facts. Basically a reconquest of Africa or something like that. I already went over that, but again, she says, well, I could tell I have Ashkenazi and Berber or Barber of antiquity in my DNA as well. That's fire. Facts. Yeah, it was getting hot in here today, Ak, with the information. It was getting real hot in here today with the information. Says, what are your thoughts on this so-called ghost DNA that is present amongst some West African tribes? I know the Yoruba are one of the tribes who carry this DNA that scholars have no answer for. I don't believe it's the Yoruba that have the ghost DNA, because I know that the Yoruba, specifically, they are 97% E1B1A. Then they have 3% haplogroup R1B. So I don't believe it's the Yoruba, but I think it's another group. And I think the ghost DNA you're talking about is haplogroup D. I'm not sure. If you have a study or something on it, you can drop the link into the chat and I can read up on it, but I'm not totally sure what you're talking about. I don't want to make any assumptions. Shalom. And what specific book were you talking about, brother? What specific book were you talking about? Were you talking about the one we're dealing with, the Israelite migrations to Africa, or something else? And again, the live stream, or the link to the live stream, is in the channel for anyone or is in the comment section for anyone who wants to come up And again, if anyone has any final questions, thoughts, or comments, please drop them. If not, we will wrap this up, and I'll see you all tomorrow or next Shabbat, man. All right, great work, Young Blood. Thank you for tuning in, and I pray you have a blessed Shabbat day. All right, good. All right, so I'll just stick around for about 1-2 more minutes, see if any questions pop up. If not, we're gonna wrap it up. And again, you all enjoy the rest of you all Shabbat. You all enjoy the rest of you all Shabbat, man. I hope you all enjoyed the video. It's actually some more stuff I can get into. Let me just show this before I get off, because even on JewishDNA.net, they have these clades or E3A clades, EM2 clades on there, which is very interesting. The brother says, "Hi, I am Gikuyu or Kikuyu. How can I know my DNA?" Brother, shalom, all the way from East Africa. More than likely, you would have that Bantu parental marker of E1B1A. More than likely, you would. And he says, and our migration route from the DNA. Actually, let me share my screen. I have a video for you to go watch. It's not dealing with DNA, but it is dealing with you all's migration route into Africa, or the history of you all and you all's oral history. You all say you came in from the east into Misri. You went down into Meru or Axcom, and ended up breaking off into where you are now. Let me see if I can find this video for you real quick, and then I'm gonna show something else. I'm gonna drop the link in the chat for you as well. All right. So if you was to go to my channel and look at this video right here, where here's the link to it. That's the link, but here's what it looks like. If you was to go to my channel, you would get a good understanding of your specific tribe and their history. Bantu Israelite History Part 2. Here I basically go into the Kikuyu. Let me see. Yeah, I bring out a lot of history of the Kikuyu and a lot of things you all's elders said as well. Right here is another good book that you should get. This is written by one of your sisters as well, a Kikuyu sister as well. Kikuyu Mystery Revealed, Descendants of Asher, a Lost Tribe of Israel. So I do recommend you try to get this book as well. And again, you should check out this video as well. But more than likely, with you being Kikuyu, you will be of that E1B1A marker. Good. Thank you, brother. The brother says the ghost DNA comes from the A00 haplogroup. So yeah, I don't really know much about that, but I know that it would not be related to those invading Bantu peoples. It wouldn't be related to a lot of those West African groups, basically, because again, those A groups were replaced by those E groups, or displaced, not necessarily replaced, but displaced. So again, I'm about to show this one last thing, and then if there's no more questions or comments, I'm gonna wrap it up. So I wanted to show this because it's very interesting. If you go to JewishDNA.net, it actually has the E1B P2 clades on here, meaning E1B1A, E1B1B. So this is the catalog of YDNA Jewish branches. And you can see the different E1B lineages. You got E1BV2, you got E1BV 830. You also got E1A, which is very interesting. But if you click on E1B old, it'll take you to the different EP2 branches that are in modern day Jewish groups. For example, you can go to E1BM2 or P277 and see that it was in a group as well. And it mentions off 2 of the reported persons have the same surname. The third reference is from YSearch. It was not possibly to find that on YSearch. The person is from Poland, so you have Jews from Poland with this specific EP2 or E1B1A haplotype. It says this Y branch P277 is mainly from Eastern Africa. A few persons are from the Middle East, such as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar or Kuwait. The person went probably from Mesopotamia or Egypt to the Ashkenazi communities. So this is saying that it's possible that the descendant of these Jews, or this Jew that has this specific clade, possibly came from somewhere near Egypt or Mesopotamia into these Ashkenazi communities. All right, which it's kind of what I believe. You had a few E1B1As, few E1B1Bs going to these locations, and it basically got overtaken, or a lot of people got absorbed into that group and started to take on the Jewish culture. All right. And again, there's other ones you can go to, like this one as well. Mention this says this is a branch, or this branch is a member of the Sephardic branches. So that's very interesting. I just wanted to show that they even have this, or the Sub-Saharan African genome on their lineages on the JewishDNA.net, or their branches. So that's very interesting. So one last question, brother says, or one last comment. He says, we have a lot of brothers confusing that we came from Namibia, or Namibia. How can we disprove that from DNA? Thank you. I will follow you a lot, and y'all bless. So the brother's saying we have a lot of brothers confusing that we came from Namibia. How can we disprove that? Oh, well, we can just look at the ancient DNA from Namibia and the people that's in that locations. And facts, the brother hit it right on. The brother says, ask them what ancient E1B1A, M2 DNA fossils did they find in Namibia to prove that claim. Because again, we can find E1B1A in a lot of places, you know what I'm saying, in ancient times that's not in Namibia, that's not in Sub-Saharan Africa. You know what I'm saying? You can find it in Iran, find it in the Mediterranean, you know what I'm saying, Yemen, Arabia, things like that. So the question you have to ask them is to show you, your DNA or your tribe's DNA being in that location. So again, I'm going to give you like 20, 30 more seconds just in case for those last comments coming in. And if not, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up, family. Again, man, please like and share this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. Bringing out some pretty good information, connecting those Sub-Saharan African populations to the Levant by way of PPNB ancestry, by way of Bronze Age ancestry, and even by way of Jewish ancestry, or Jewish heritage, rather. So you all enjoy you all Shabbat day, and again, I will see you next time. All right. Let's see.